Hey,
How's it going, buddy?
good. Feeling well rested after my time away, uh, lugging massive amounts of luggage to every known corner of the country.
That sounds great. That sounds like you got a workout.
It was what I wait for every year. I love it.
Just pack
I
up,
want nothing more.
pack up like 10 suitcases
Yep.
and drag them around with a newborn
Yep.
baby.
Yeah, well, interestingly enough, this trip was actually a month early, but it was the point of the trip was to celebrate the first birthday. Um, so I don't know if we can call her a newborn anymore. She's not even really a baby. She's like walking and stuff. It's kind of weird.
Still a baby, dude.
Yeah.
I think around 2 or 2.5, 3, they become a toddler, something like that.
Yeah.
At this point, they'll still gladly eat broken glass or stick their fingers in electrical sockets. They do all kinds of things. You have to watch them, dude. Babies have no boundaries.
Yeah. My sister, my older sister, when she had her daughter about this age, and I didn't have any kids, and she was like, yeah. So it turns out parenting is just trying to keep your kids from accidentally killing themselves, like every day, all day. And I'm like, okay, I can see that.
Yeah, and then you eventually, I don't know if you care less or you trust them more, but it's some combination of those things, and you start putting them out in the world.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
good.
I was the second of four, and so like I got to see the transition of my parents from like, you know, not not helicopter parenting or anything, but like the sense of like like being very careful about what things do, and then all of a sudden my little brother who's like the youngest and like 12 years different from the oldest, he's just like whatever.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That was Missy when we had Eleanor. It was organic foods and cloth diapers and organic, diaper rash cream. Had to be organic and made from beeswax and all kinds of stuff. And it was gross, dude. Let me tell you something. It was gross. And then when we had our second baby, she's like, "Yeah, Kraft mac and cheese and disposable diapers." That's what's
Yeah,
happening now.
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
good.
My wife was interested in the cloth diapers, and I'm like, that you won't want it. Okay, you clean them.
Yeah, it's gross. I
It's
did that. We did that for the whole duration of one baby's
mm,
worth, and it was, yeah, no.
yeah.
All right, so
What an amazing anecdote to kick off a technical
yeah,
stream.
yeah, yeah. We're gonna talking about baby diapers. Technical stream. Wow. Well, there is a couple really significant changes, including one that I'm very excited about. I know we've talked about some of this in the past, but they're imminent now, and it's going to have an impact on how the project how well how the project carries on a week to week basis. And we're gonna talk about some of that today. I'm actually gonna just ask questions here and there, but it sounds like you're back and you're on fire, and I think everyone should hear what's in store from the horse's mouth. You horse.
Thank you. Sure. So, uh, in terms of imminent changes, I assume you're referring to a lot of the pipeline changes that we've been talking about, right?
Yes.
So that's one of them. There's a bunch of things actually. I think what might be useful is to just talk really quickly about the next release because I don't know what it is about the last few months, but we um, one of the things that we want to do. Let me take even one further step back. One of the things we want to do is get more people involved with more aspects of the project and make the two of us, everything I say right now is we'll talk about like how, like what the past few months have looked like. Obviously, when it comes to like releasing new versions of the platform, that's something that is pretty centralized to the two of us. But our intention is overwhelmingly that more people get involved. In fact, one of the things that I'm going to be doing very shortly is not just not just improving the build and release process for the platform, but also for the curriculum, and also creating documentation so that you can do that if you want to help, sort of cut a release of either the curriculum or the platform. There will be documentation that will help you understand how that's done, and then maybe a few releases where you shadow one of us on how that's done, and then maybe in the future somebody else can be in charge of it. And a lot of open source projects work that way, where you have a specific set of scripts or workflows that are designed to automate the release of a certain project. And a lot of folks on the project, especially if they're like corporately backed, they'll rotate engineers through that process so that everybody can get involved with it. It's a lot better than having, because I've worked in both environments. I've worked in that environment. I've also worked in an environment where we have like a dedicated like pipeline and release team. And there's pros and cons to each. It kind of depends, but I'm actually personally a lot more in favor of simple release workflows that kind of just are obvious and everybody can become skilled at them. And that's what that's not reality today, I'll admit, because a lot of it's based on my own personal experiences in the past. But my goal is absolutely to open the kimono, as it were. So that's part of what we'll be talking about today.
Awesome.
So all of that said, I should say also, back to what I was originally going to say, the last, let me look actually, because this is going to be sad no matter what, but I just want to see how sad, because I feel bad about it. If you look at any number of the projects, NRE Labs curriculum or Syrind or anything like that, because right now they're released in conjunction with each other. Yeah, the last release, which is v0.4.0, was released in April 19th, 2019. And what that means is we haven't had new content on the main NRE Lab site since then. It also means we haven't published a version of the platform. Now, of course, if you've been working on lessons, you have had access to the latest version of all of that stuff, but it's not into a release, which means, again, it's not in the main NRE Lab site. Because the NRE Lab site, we only use versioned releases for stability reasons. So that's not great. We actually, if you look at the release cadence before that, you see that we did relatively well prior to that in terms of cutting new releases. So what happened since April? To be honest, I'm not sure. I don't think it was one big thing. I think it was a bunch of really small things. Again, since Derek and I are pretty much the ones on the hook for doing the releases today. Again, hopefully what I said before was clear. This isn't what we want to be long term, but in the past and up to now, we've been sort of the bottleneck for that. And so, things just come up, and it wasn't just one thing. It was a bunch of little things throughout the months between then and now. So, and actually, I'll get into a few of those things because we're going to be talking about the what we view as the things that need to be done by 0.4.0, which is the next release. And so we want to break things apart a little bit and make it so that we don't feel like we have to boil the ocean to get a release out. Because while that's not technically true, it can feel like that's true. Especially for major releases like the 0.4.0. We've been kind of on 0.3.x for a while, so that's part of the problem, I think. So anyway, all of that to say, unfortunately, we haven't done a release in a while. We have pushed a lot of changes to the latest version. So if you've been paying attention to if you've been building lessons with self-medicate or something like that, you've still been getting updates. It's just that there's actually a lot of lessons that we haven't published yet because we haven't created a new release. And there's actually a task that even if we did create a release, some lessons wouldn't make it in. So there's a lot of, I think the moral of the story here is there's a lot of work in progress that's just been stalled out for a long time, and so we want to solve that. So in order to do that, what I want to do is I want to get pretty crystal clear on what needs done for 0.4.0. And what really needs done, not just what's currently on the plan. Because right now, what's on the plan is pretty broad. Let me share my screen if I can find it. There it is. All right, can you see that?
Yep.
So I've covered this on previous streams, but I'll just reiterate it. Every time we want to plan a release, we create a project at the org level. So if you go to Network Reliability Engineering's GitHub organization here, and you click projects, you'll see at least always you'll see at least one, usually two, because what I do is I create this project plan for 0.4.0, for instance, and as I work on that, I you see the progress bar sort of goes forth, and there's been a lot of work already done on 0.4.0, I should say. That's something that's, I think, important to call out. But there are also what I'll also do usually is open the next release in advance of it, and that way, if I feel like a task that I previously had identified for 0.4.0, if I feel like that needs to get postponed, I have a home for it, so I can just say go to the next release. It's not the best way of doing things, but at the very least, it allows me to do something. So the moral of the story is this project has existed for a while because we've been wanting to do 0.4.0 for a while. But there's a lot of really big tasks in this release that we want to get done, but some of them we want to actually move because they're just too big and probably don't need to be done that urgently. But there are a few things that do need to be done pretty urgently, and then there are other things that have like half of their subtasks that need to be done urgently, and then the other ones don't. So if you scroll down, like for instance, I opened these like improving the Git lesson. I opened a PR on that, and then a PR on an introduction to Python lesson. Those don't need to be done in this release. They're good ideas, but they don't need to be done in this release. There's a bunch of other things, but let's actually what might be useful. And Toad, stop me if you have questions or if I need to slow down or do something. But what I would actually really like to do is just go through all of these issues and either punt them to the next release or explain what needs done, and that way people can understand the work that needs done and maybe help.
Okay.
So this issue is something that Olivier opened. He's very involved in the project lately and has done a lot of very awesome things. He calls out one of the things that we've had for a while, which is that Syringe actually installs a network policy to block internet access, or really any access outside of the lesson namespace.
Yep.
If you read that, the long and short of it is to make that optional, so that if you so you can opt into making that not happen. So if you really want to take that on yourself, you certainly can. We'll still use this in production, so we won't use this option, but Olivier wants it, so it's easy to do. You just add a config flag to say, hey, don't create a network policy, and we won't. So that's easy to do. We can keep this for this release.
Yep.
Interface down trigger not firing SD2 lesson. This is a bug I identified because I was going through when I was going through and identifying or changing all of the lessons in the current curriculum to the new endpoint format. I noticed that the SD2 lesson was broken. There's a specific thing that's broken that's described in the issue. I do want to figure that out before the next release, because in production it's fine. It's clearly something that has happened between then and now, so I want to identify that and keep that. All right. The third one is a little more complicated, moving to packet. So if you've paid attention, I think we've talked about this briefly. We have a number of things that we want to do, and one of them is moving to a bare metal as a service provider. I feel this is one of the things that's most painful, because we actually have a lot, or really two, coming up on 3 lessons that could really use this change. The primary image that we're using right now, just because it's the one that's most popular, which is the VQFX Speedy image, which is a VQFX image that we put a snapshot on, which makes it boot pretty quickly.
Yep.
And it doesn't use any of the hardware emulation for the line cards, and so it boots pretty quickly, and it doesn't require a lot of resources. Unfortunately, there's other images that don't that aren't that easy, that require a little bit more, and nested virtualization kills them. So we want to be able to move to a bare metal as a service provider. And I'll tell you, the two lessons that use that, they're really unusable until we do this, which means that until we do this, we can't publish them. They're in PTR, but they just don't. You can load them if you want. They take a long time to boot, and in addition, once they boot, the line card isn't even working until about 10 minutes after that. So it's pretty bad. Unfortunately, there's actually a number of things that we need to do even before that. And so while I absolutely I wouldn't do this if it wasn't the case, because I do think this is very important. I don't see this getting done before 0.4.0. And it's really, to be honest, it's not even really a release specific thing. I think that's the main thing, because this can happen outside of a release cadence. You'll notice this is in the Antidote ops repo. This is about how we're running Antidote. So this doesn't really affect, I think, the release process for the project or for the platform specifically, or even the curriculum. Once we do have Packet as a backend, we'll move those two lessons from PTR to prod. So that will happen, but I don't think we need to. I don't think we need to keep this in this project plan.
Okay.
I will. I won't remove it. What I'll do is I'll just move it to 0.4.0 if I can. If it lets me scroll down. So I'll remove it from that, and then I'll put it on 0.4.1. That way, at least I have a reminder. That's another thing I like to do, which I probably shouldn't do, but I use that as a way of making sure I don't lose really important issues.
Yep.
Okay. Various labs cleanup tasks. This is a bunch of Antidote web fixes. Let me read through them real quick. Copy and paste still broken. That's in its own issue, I think. Yeah. So copy and paste in PTR is broken, and it's got its own issue. I think that's the only item here that's urgent. So what I'm going to actually do is remove this, because the only thing that I wouldn't want to move out of this project is the copy and paste broken part. So that's fine. I'm going to remove this. And the other ones are not urgent. The copy and paste has its own issue, so we'll keep that in there once we get to it.
All right.
Brian Linkletter opened this issue, and I'm pretty sure I'm waiting on him for more info.
I can. Okay. What was your question? What info were you waiting on him?
Right. Yeah. So the original issue he opened. This issue has gone through a few different changes. I don't think the original reason he opened it is there anymore. I think we answered that properly. His initial concern was that we didn't support connection between non-devices.
Yeah.
That's technically not true, but in the previous version of Syringe, which has since been more than fixed because it's been revamped entirely. The actual cause was if you don't have any devices in your lesson definition, then it wouldn't support any connections at all, which was not ideal. But anyway, the whole devices concept has been blown away, so none of that matters anymore. At the end of the one thing that he's still not clear on is the CNI plugin still assigns IP addresses to each of these networks, and he was calling out the fact that they get the same IP address. I want to know. I want to make sure that he can still pass traffic on any address that he wants, because that's what my experience has been. Once that's confirmed, I'm going to just modify the CNI config to not provision an IP address, because these segments are just layer 2 segments. They're just Linux bridges. The fact that an IP address is assigned doesn't actually matter, because you can change that.
Yeah.
So I'm just waiting for more info on that. I don't think much work needs done, if any. So I'm happy to keep that in here and just get some clarity from him. Brian, if you watch, just please let me know what you think, because I don't think that's going to require a lot of work, if anything. I did skip over this. This isn't actually an issue. It's just a little card I created. I might end up creating an issue out of it, or I might punt it to the next release. Actually, I will punt it to the next release. I it looks like I can't move it until I convert it to an issue, I guess. Anyway, I will. I'll do that later. Basically, right now the VQFX disk images, because we still only have a few images in the project, it's okay that we're doing this thus far. But what I want to do is I want to set us up for long-term success, which is storing all of our images locally, or not storing our images locally. That's what we're doing right now. So I have a VQFX image on my laptop, and so in the very rare event, I think we haven't done this in like half a year, but in the very rare event that we need to update one of the VQFX images, I run the Docker build on my laptop and then push it. Very, very not ideal, obviously. So long term, what I want to do is I want to add those disk images to our own GCE bucket. It's kind of like an S3 bucket from Amazon. And then the Docker build would just download those images from that location, and that way anybody can run the build.
Yep.
And one of the things that I'm going to talk about soon is actually running the image creation, the image build process in our release workflow. So that's another improvement that I want to make. So, but that can happen anytime. I think this, honestly, this is probably something that I want to just add to that. Let me just do that right now, actually, before I forget. Delete note. Yes, yes, yes. And then I will add it here. I'll get to this eventually. This is like the big issue I want to talk about. This is kind of a junk drawer at the moment. Okay. Moving quickly, move a Jupyter page to docs. This is pretty straightforward. Right now we have a dedicated sort of static page. If you go to, what was it? I think it's Jupyter lab guides.html. No, that's not it. If we go to, yeah, load the Napalm lesson, and then I think there's a link to it at the top, but in any case, basically there's a static HTML page built into Antidote Web that explains what, basically why Jupyter notebooks exist and how to use them. There is actually a page in the docs that explains this from like a lesson builder's perspective, but there is not a page from the lesson learner's perspective. Like if you're using a lesson, what are Jupyter notebooks and how can you use them, and like literally how do you navigate through them? Right now, that documentation is not in our docs, but rather built into Antidote Web, which was useful initially, but it's not now. It doesn't make sense to have that in the in the actual web UI. So this is just simply really a copy, a cut and paste exercise from the latter to the former.
Okay.
So that's fine. We can do that in 0.4.0. Again, doesn't take a lot of work. It looks like I skipped this. Separate lesson catalog into separate page. This is interesting. I don't know how I feel about this. I'm curious what your thoughts are. Basically, the gist of that, and actually let me go to PTR because that's what's going to show what I want to do. If you go to lesson catalog, you'll see that it links to advisor/index.html, and that currently has the layout that you're familiar with, which is that the advisor is up top and then the catalog's below it. And then if you click on the advisor, it just goes to the same thing because they're both on the same page.
Yep.
So I have them as separate menu items, but they just go to the same location. What I'm suggesting is that we break them out into separate pages.
Okay.
Because there's a lot of things that I want to do with the catalog itself. Instead of having these like 3 columns, I want to do something a little more dynamic, based on not just static categories, but also things like tags and maybe search queries and things like that. My gut is telling me that that's something we should push to a later release, because that's probably going to be a decent amount of work. And I don't know that it's that urgent from anybody's perspective.
Sure.
So if you have feedback on this, please let us know. But I think the right call right now, just to make sure that 0.4.0 has as few tasks remaining as possible, is to punt this to the next release. So we'll do that. Okay, now we're at this Jupyter page. So we've talked about that. Alternative images POC. What's we're already doing this. I don't even need to have this right now because we're actually doing this actively. So we can actually close this. I think it's not done. Well, actually, I think you're working on the Cumulus image, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So talk about that a little bit.
Sure. It's just Cumulus in a VM. Actually, we talked about this because Brian Linkletter really wanted FRR, and I started working on that, and I got FFR working in a container. The problem with that is there are namespaced sysproc properties that have to be modified that would require the FFR container to have escalator privileges on the host, and we can't launch that in
Yeah.
production. So it makes more sense to put something like actually any network device, if you will, to run them as a VM inside of a container, and that's what I effectively did with Cumulus, which it's and then there's interfaces that you map to bridges inside of your container, and those bridges or what or bridges or what connect you to the other containers inside of the lesson topology. So that's effectively what it is. It works fine. It was very easy to do because you don't have to deal with the containerization of the actual thing.
Sure.
Um, and
Yeah,
it'll be the same with
and
FR.
one of the things that I'll talk about after we go through this release planning exercise is I'm going to be one of the things that's been keeping me from doing release work actually is publishing design docs in a draft form for the little mini projects that we want to do. We have about 6 mini projects that each represent a fairly significant amount of work, and one of those things is changing the way we represent images. So using Docker has its advantages because, of course, the whole Docker build and Docker file um, user experience or developer experience, whatever you want to call it, is really cool. But you've just called out one of the biggest shortcomings with being able to using containers as our endpoints, and that is if you need permissions beyond what containers are normally allowed, and if you want to do certain things like at the kernel level especially, it becomes challenging. There are actually technologies that you can use to provide the same user experience of like building Docker images while providing VM level isolation, and um, that'll be a mini project, so stay tuned for that. That'll be something that we're going to be basically dedicating a concerted effort to fixing, and it'll be something that's done across the board. So it won't be like, oh, use a VM if you want to do this, or oh, use a, no, it's going to be more fundamental than that. Like this is a new way that we're going to do endpoints, because there are pros and cons to each approach, and what we want to do is preserve the current experience of building Docker images while providing VM level isolation. There's a bunch of projects out there. Actually, one of our colleagues, Dimitri, just let me know about one of them, and it looks really promising. So this is a problem today, but we're hoping to solve that with a mini project
Which
very
one was
soon.
that?
It has to do with Firecracker from AWS, but there's tooling built on top of it, because what Firecracker does is they use like little mini VMs for serverless stuff. But and then Weave, I think the company Weave created some tooling on top of that to provide the Docker-esque experience. I don't remember what it's called. No, it's Ignite.
Oh, it's
So
called
I haven't
Ignite.
looked at it. Yeah, I haven't looked at it like in detail at all. I just looked at the link that Dimitri sent me, but it looks extremely promising, and it spiritually, sort of aligned with what I want, which was, VM level isolation without sacrificing the current user experience. That's the end goal. So anything we do, I think, should do that, which would make it awesome for anything we want to do. You can run anything in an endpoint because it's basically a VM, except that you don't know it's a VM because it's being built like a container. That's the goal.
Nice.
All right. So I added these improving. These are PRs as you from the icon, so it looks like I built something. But I'm not going to go into detail here because they're not ready clearly, and they're not that urgent. So I'm gonna punt them to the next project. It's less important to do those, I think, right now than it is to just simply um, keep things moving along. Do you agree?
Yeah, yeah.
So we'll punt those. That's easy. Copy paste is broken. That's something that we've identified in the web UI. It's not entirely true. Like you can still do it, but you have to use right click. I think copy works actually, but it's paste that's broken. And you can still paste if you right click in the terminal, but the button that we put up there that says paste is not working for some reason. So while there's a workaround, it's still something that we want to fix, and so we'll leave that in there.
All right.
It should also be pretty easy to fix once we figure out the problem. Antidote Web terminal connection issues. This is something. So I think we should keep it. I don't know. It's not urgent because this has been a problem since the beginning. Like every once in a while, every once in like a blue moon, you'll load a lesson and one of the tabs will not load properly, and a refresh fixes it like right away. So, and this has been in place for a long time. So I think the right call here is probably to move it to 0.4.1 because it's not exactly new, and it does have a really easy workaround, and it's pretty rare. So I do want to address this, but I want to give us a little more time because the goal for, I should have mentioned this at the beginning, the goal for 0.4.0 is to get all of these things done by the end of the week. So because of that, I think it's probably a good idea to punt this to the next release.
Yep.
But it pains me to say that because it does seem kind of silly, but it's been an issue since we launched. So
right, this is one of those things where it's going to be finding the exact cause and getting it resolved might take time and effort that is not. I mean, it should be done, but it's also is easily outweighed by other important things.
Yeah. The VQFX full issues, these are actually tightly coupled with the move to packet, so I'm going to move this as well.
Yep.
Because we know that it's going to work properly unless it's running on packet. So we'll punt that. Building a self-service automation system on top of VDI. So this is an exciting lesson that I want to build, but I'm going to punt it. It actually the reason I wanted to build this for this release is because it uses a little the endpoints change included a new functionality called presentations, and one of the presentation types is HTTP, which does a little iframe. And this lesson actually uses that. This lesson is the reason why I started thinking about building that functionality at all. And so because that functionality now exists in the proper way, I wanted to put in a lesson that highlights that. But there's no way I'm going to be able to get to it this week. So while it's kind of silly that there's not like a flagship lesson to highlight that new functionality, which does exist and works, it's just not going to be feasible for me to get to it. You know, if we do get through all of these tasks, I'll consider doing it if there's time left. But for now, I think the right call is to punt it.
Okay.
I don't like that because I like to have a lesson that highlights a new functionality instead of just saying, hey, this functionality exists. Good luck finding out how it works, or good luck seeing it in action, because you can't. But yeah, I think it's still the right call. User editing improvements, this is definitely puntable because it's just a feature enhancement that's basically improving the way that people edit stuff inside of the terminal. So I have no problem punting this. In fact, I almost would prefer, I'm going to remove it, and I'm not going to add it to 0.4.1. I'll open it as a new tab, and then what I'll do is I'll add it to, you can see that we've punted this a few times. I'll add it to the mini project for Antidote Web. We actually have another mini project, which is for revamping Antidote Web. And the reason we're doing that is because we're actually engaging a vendor to help us with some of that heavy lifting. And so while we won't have them do everything in our wish list, it would be nice to have all of the Antidote Web sort of wish list items all in one place. And that way folks like them, as well as other sort of web, front end folks in the community, can go to that one place to figure out what needs done. So I think that's the right call. Style checks and enforcement in CI. Oh yeah, like spell checks. I'm punting this because we're not adding a lot more content for this release. This is basically I spend one of the things that we and now Derek, now that you're doing reviews for the curriculum, I imagine this is true for you as well. A lot of the reviewing time for curriculum PRs is spent doing basic like spell checks and grammar checks. And there are tools that you can use to automate that. And so that's really what this is about, is adding those tools to the pipeline. But that's definitely not 0.4.0. If anything, it's 4.1 and perhaps beyond. Okay, I'm going to skip over this because this is the last thing I want to talk about. Interactive wizard for building a new lesson and a new collection. Absolutely puntable. That's nice, but definitely not something we need to do by the end of the week. Using certificate-based authentication instead of a static password, definitely puntable, because that's actually gonna require a decent amount of work. So definitely puntable. Confusing lesson directory parameters. I think this is closed. I don't think this needs to be open. I think I fixed. I think this is fixed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, because exactly. There's an environment. It used to be that there was an environment variable called lesson directory, and I think even in the last release, I changed it to be curriculum directory. So yeah, I'm just gonna close that. That's definitely done. View source on GitHub. So I want a button on the web front end that basically allows you to go to the source, just like you have like on a doc site. You can say like edit on GitHub for anything that's stored in GitHub. Definitely should do this, and it probably won't be that hard. But I would say definitely puntable as well, because it's not super critical. What do you think?
Yeah, that's fine.
All right. Nearing the end. Center around curriculum. Again, I don't know why I keep having this in here. This is exactly finished. It's done. There's a linked issue, so I'm not sure what that's about. No, that's closed. All validation entire curriculum, right? Yeah. Yeah, this is closed. I don't know why this is still open. This is basically zooming out, because now we're not just, now it's not just lessons that are the it's not just lessons that are the resource. Now it's collections, and there will be others. So lesson authors in metadata. Ooh. I'm gonna punt this, but I actually want to also open it in a new tab so that I can remember to add it to the Syringe mini project.
Okay.
Because I think, and well, actually, to be honest, I think it might already be in there. So anyway, I'll follow up with that. Definitely puntable, though. This is one of the things that I want to talk. One of the things I wanted to do for a while is figure out how to attribute contributions beyond just who initially creates the lesson. So like imagine, and we're actually seeing this today. We had somebody create a new stage, actually two recently in the past few weeks, actually, while I was out. Two people adding stages to an existing lesson, and those contributions were awesome, but unfortunately the people who initially contributed those lessons, their name is on the lesson. And so how do you remedy that? How do you basically make it so that people understand that not just one person worked on a lesson? And I imagine that's going to be very common over time.
Yeah, the same will be true of the collections feature probably as well.
Yeah, probably true. So what I want to do is I want to do like a guest book kind of concept. Like if you contribute, like add your name to the book, and it's a lesson specific sort of quote book. Like you say like, hey, Matt was here, and here's what I did. It's like a lesson specific change log, if you will, and that way, and then that'll also get plumbed through to the web UI. So if you want to look at the authors for a particular lesson, you can click it, and you can go to their GitHub pages and all that kind of stuff. Nice. As opposed to just statically like saying, so and so created this lesson in the lesson guide, which is sort of not immutable, but it doesn't change often. I want this to be a little bit more dynamic, and I want it to be more inclusive of people who don't necessarily create lessons from scratch. So definitely want to do this, but I would say not urgent. Definitely doesn't need to be done by 0.4.1, and probably couldn't be done because it will require a decent amount of work. So I will punt it to the next release, but I'll say let's keep it in that cadence. Okay, so what that means, and this is good, I'm proud of us, because that means we now have 6 big to-dos for this release. 6 things standing in the way of us actually doing the release. And as you can see, I do have also a few things in progress, so I won't include those in what I'm talking about because they're kind of self-explanatory. One of which actually isn't even related to the release, so I might even punt this, but none of these three actually require a lot of work, so I'll leave those as an exercise for the listener. So I've talked about all of these issues on the left, the to-do, meaning the things that haven't had work started on them. There's 6. And all of them seem to be pretty straightforward to do. So I'm encouraged even more because of that. There's one, the ST2 troubleshooting and the copy and paste troubleshooting might take a decent amount of time, but the other ones definitely won't, and even those won't take a tremendous amount of time, I would expect. The one thing that will take a lot of time is this last one, improve build and release process. So let me actually open this in a new tab, that way you can see what's going on here. As you can see, I created this a long time ago. This was created in January. And there are a bunch of like sort of subtasks on this, and I've accomplished 3 of them. So you might notice, basically building and publishing binaries for Syringe in addition to the Docker image. So one of the things that we did when we built the workflow for releasing a new version of the platform was to perform a Docker build on all of the platform projects like Antidote Web and Syringe. That's been that happened a while ago. We've been doing that for a while. However, once we started building like client tooling, specifically SYRCTL, it made it pretty clear that we needed to go beyond just building the Docker images. We needed to actually compile that software and publish binaries somewhere. And so that's what we did. If you go to the Syringe project now, and you go to releases, and you can see that we pre-compile binaries for most major platforms, and you can just simply download them. You can still compile from source if you'd like. Obviously, that's an option for you, but if you just want to use the binaries that we've built, you certainly can do that as well. Each of these archives contains 2 binaries, one for Syringe D and the other one for SYRC. Anyway, that's an example of something that we have. But there's a lot of other things that we want to do that I think are important in general. Some of these things are much more important than others, and I think and what I would like to do is actually organize even these subtasks, because I think improving the build and release process is probably going to be a long-term ongoing thing, but these specific tasks are much more immediate. So I won't go into a ton of detail here. The one thing I will call out is that we want to separate the curriculum release from the platform release, because again, the name of the game for this stream really is how to get 0.4.0 out the door. One of the things that's been not holding up, but one of the things that has been a consideration for every release is that you have to get the curriculum and the platform sort of organized together, because the release workflow releases all of them at once. And so if I could pick like the most important task on this list, it would probably be this one: separate curriculum release into its own workflow, and then basically Derek would be in charge of it. There's a bunch of other things, obviously, improvements that I want to make. I think the other sort of a second priority is we don't actually build all of the images in this workflow. We only build the platform. And so again, if you go to the curriculum, that's kind of problematic, because what that means is all of these images in the curriculum sort of stay static. And if you use them in the in a lesson, there's no way to sort of there's no release for each of these images, and so you're still going to be on the hook for managing changes. So we ran into this recently, actually, where we had an improvement that we wanted to make in one of these images, but because production was using the same version of the image that we would build outside of production, meaning there's no versioning, so it's all just latest. That means that any change we make outside of production would also affect production. And so what we want to do is we want to start building these images for every single release and tagging them, so that production uses a tagged release of these images in addition to the platform images, so that everything is versioned.
Yep.
And I think that's going to be a lot of work, because that means we have to build every single image for every single release, and of course that's going to take time. But I think in terms of preserving or eliminating that fragility, it's pretty freaking important. So I'll leave it at that. I could talk for hours on each of these subtasks, but I'll leave it at this. Those are the two I think the most important subtasks. And what I'll do as soon as we're done with the stream is I'll organize these subtasks into sections so that it's clear the things that I think are important for doing before the next release, and then the other things I think are less important to do sort of after 0.4. This isn't necessarily part of this is the build and release process itself. So we don't actually we don't version the versioning software, if you will. But I think there are definitely certain things that need to be done before the next release, and then there are other things that can. So I'll organize this task accordingly.
Okay. Yeah, I'm in particular excited about the separation of the curriculum from the platform in terms of release. I mean, that'll allow us to get to a point where we have at least some new content on a weekly basis, even which would be fantastic.
Yeah.
And I think people are waiting on that, so that'd be super great.
Yeah, the only thing that I think the only it's not a drawback, but it's something that we definitely have to think about that we wouldn't have had to think about in the current model, which is compatibility with the current published version of the platform. So basically, the platform is going to be published. It's going to be released through its own cadence, and what that means is the release cadence for the curriculum is going to have to be organized such that you are staying on top of new features that are in the platform, and you only use features in a lesson that are in a published release of the platform. Because right now what we do is because everything's versioned the same way and released at the same time, we have lessons that are published that are merged into the curriculum, and they use new features in the platform. But because both of them are published at the same time, that's okay. In this new model, though, I think what we'll end up doing is probably being like one release behind. So, like as a lesson is looking at new features. If like you're building a new lesson that uses a new feature in the platform, that lesson won't be able to go into production until that feature has made it into a release of the platform. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course. And we can figure that out, dude. It could be a version number in the metadata. It could be, not just that, but when we're self-medicate, might not pull from master, right? It might pull from, latest release.
Yeah, that's another thing we've gone back and forth on many times, because if we set it to latest, that means people have to be on top of the platform, like the changes in the platform.
Yeah.
But then if we don't set it to that, then some people, and we've run into this too, where some people are like, hey, I want to use this feature, and I was like, well, okay, you got to set it to latest then. So we've actually changed it, I think, 4 times in self-medicate between using the latest version and then a tagged version.
So what I can do with that's we can just make that a configurable variable.
Yeah.
And then people have to just know what to do, what's appropriate for what they're trying to do.
Yeah. Is that it? I think that's all I wanted to talk about with this. Wasn't there one more thing I wanted to talk about outside of the release? I don't think so.
I don't know.
Or I think so, but I don't remember what it was.
Oh, okay. Well, outside of the release.
I think it might have been the mini project stuff, but I kind of alluded to it. So, one of the things that I've been trying to do lately is there are some things that are fairly urgent that I got to do myself just because I'm familiar with it. But whenever possible, if it's possible for me to take a step back and just document what needs done, that way other people get up to speed and can help. I'm trying to do that whenever possible. Literally at every piece of work I do, I ask myself that question. And I've known for a long time that some really big things need done. Like Syringe probably needs to be re-architected, not totally rewritten, but a lot of the components, the logic within it needs to be broken out. And there's a whole rabbit hole. And then of course there's Antidote Web. So I'm not a web developer. I did, I guess, okay at what has been built, but there's a ton of improvements that need to be made, especially when it comes to like supporting mobile and all kinds of stuff and just following standards. Things that I know I didn't do well. So that's a whole other rabbit hole. And then there's things like the whole image process and converting to a format where you basically have like Docker build VMs, that kind of thing, which we already talked about. That's its own rabbit hole. So we basically have identified about 6 quote rabbit holes, and I call them mini projects because they're smaller than the project itself, because they usually focus on one component, but they're pretty big undertakings, and each undertaking has its own subtask hierarchy. So one of the reasons why I haven't been focusing on like code is because I've been building documentation around that. The idea is that I create a draft. It won't be. I'm not going to finalize it. I'm going to put something up there that's in draft format and let everybody comment on it, and we can, as a community, we can figure out what needs done. But I'm creating the first version of each of those documents, and each document will focus on a specific mini project. That mini project will have its own sort of project management, like loosely coupled or loosely structured around that. That way people, like if like for instance, if you have web front end skills and that's pretty much all you want to work on, then you'll have a home for that. Like you'll have a sort of mini project that you can focus on, that's a concerted effort. It's like a sprint, so to speak. So that's something that I'm also going to be doing, and one of the things that's been keeping me from actually writing code is putting in the long-term work of documenting what needs done instead of just doing it. And that takes time. So I'm doing my best to get that finished. I think pruning this list down so that we can get 0.4.0 done in the next week will help. So my 2 highest priorities are probably working this plan down to completion so that we can release 0.4.0, and then sort of simultaneously finishing at least one of the draft documents for the mini project. I won't be building all of these drafts at once and then releasing all 6. What I'll do is I'll finish one. And when I say finish, I mean finishing a draft. So it won't be done. It'll just be structured enough so that people can comment on it and improve it. But finishing one at a time, getting it to a reasonable draft, that's my goal as well. And I'm hoping to have at least one done by the end of the week. And it'll be the syringe mini project because that's the biggest one, I think. So those are probably my top 2 to-dos this week. Yeah, I don't see anything else that's higher priority than these 2 things. Finishing 0.4.0 and getting the syringe mini project draft document published, so that the community can see it and comment on it and improve it.
Nice.
So.
All right. Did you just leave the call?
I did not.
Oh, you just left. You stopped sharing. All right, here we go.
Or my camera?
Yeah, I get. Okay. All right. Well, we're actually 6 minutes to the hour, so I think we can wrap this up. That was good. I'm very happy you're back. I think a lot of people are happy you're back, and they are. So I'm ready to. I love this project. I like working on this project, so I'm ready to be back doing just this project.
Yeah.
All the time, with minimal side distractions.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think getting you hooked into the release process will be fun too. I think you'll enjoy that.
Yeah, it'll be good. All right. Well, I think we're gonna wrap it up then. I'm CloudToad, CLOUDTOAD on Twitter. Give me a follow if you feel like it. Follow the main project, NRE Labs, at NRE Labs on Twitter. Matt is at MIERDIN, Meerden. Give him a follow as well. Of course, join our community at community.networkreliability.engineering and join our Discord, a link for which is provided in the documentation for the project. It's just a chat room that we use to do quick, chatting. That's what chat things are for, is chatting. and just join all those things. It'll be good. All of our social media stuff.
Join our chat room and
Yeah,
chat.
chat. Uh, yeah, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.
See you later.
See you later.